the stage is being set up for the first panel discussion in today's program, Global Food Fortification Initiatives Lesson Learned. And we'll have a very diverse list of panelists joining us. And we would like to introduce and invite all of them to join us on the stage, starting with Dr. Roland Kupka. He is the Regional Nutrition Advisor at UNICEF East Asia and Pacific. He is based in Bangkok and provides strategic support to UNICEF's nutrition program, operating in 14 countries throughout East Asia and the Pacific. Representing OECD, we'd like to invite onto stage Dr. Kumiko Takanashi. She is the Policy Analyst, Large-Scale Food Fortification Regulatory Governance Project. She focuses on the large-scale food fortification regulation project at OECD, contributing to the development of indicators for food fortification regulation and coordinating information collection in selected Asian countries. Joining us virtually in this panel discussion, Dr. Ashek Masfus. He is the portfolio lead for Food Fortification and Value Change Program of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Dr. Ashek is a professional food technologist and is experienced in food fortification and processing and human nutrition by education. He was the founding factory manager of Prent, the largest food processors in Bangladesh. Please have a seat. Yeah. And representing the World Food Program, we'd like to invite Arvind Bettigeri, who is here with us in person. He is the Regional Food Fortification Advisor for Asia and the Pacific. In his current role, he is responsible for providing technical and capacity building support to the World Food Program operations on large-scale food fortification in 17 countries of Asia and the Pacific region, building strategic partnerships with key government, private sector, and NGO partners, strengthening food system and expanding the World Food Program's fortification portfolio for the region. We'd like to welcome onto stage Dr. Deepika Anand. She is Operation Officer with the Health, Nutrition, and Population Practice of the World Bank. She's joining us here in person all the way from New Delhi, India. She is a public health nutritionist with more than 12 years of experiences in public health and nutrition in developing countries. And right now at the podium, we have the moderator of this panel discussion, Ms. Katarina Onu. She is the policy lead in IFC Food Safety, Food Loss Prevention, and Food Fortification Advisory. She has been with the World Bank Group since 2007, providing support on food safety agenda to IFC and the World Bank programs worldwide. Very recently, she authored the IFC Scan Guide, a tool developed to help analyze the policy and regulatory dimensions of a country's national food system. I'll hand the stage over to our moderator, Katarina Onu.
Thank you. So, Xin Chao, I hope I pronounced it in the right way. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to start our session on global food fortification initiatives, lessons learned. As was already said, that my name is Katerina Onu, and I'm a policy lead in the IFC Global Agribusiness Advisory, where food fortification is one of key elements of our agenda in the food safety dimension. And I'm honored to moderate this session today. So we have already heard about why food fortification is important and also why it is receiving attention from public sector authorities, from international organizations, and from the industry. We have also learned about the significance of food fortification in Vietnam. Food fortification is a well-established strategy to address nutrient deficiencies in vulnerable populations. The effectiveness of food fortification programs depends on factors such as biological efficacy of fortified food and effective and sustainable implementation, which requires continuing monitoring, control, quality assurance, and corrective measures to ensure high compliance. In our discussion today, Let's try to define the essential elements of successful food fortification programs and tools that can add efficiency of these programs and serve as an incentives for food business to implement these programs. And to do this, I suggest to view food fortification programs through the lens of international experience. We are fortunate to have our esteemed panelists from key international organizations that play important role in shaping and implementing the World Food Fortification Agenda. Please visit our event homepage for more information about today's speakers and contact details. And as you see, we have 100% gender equality in this panel today. So, dear colleagues, let's start the discussion. And let's start this discussion with the first question, which is addressed to Arvid from WFP. Arvind, why have food fortification initiatives received so much attention in recent years? And why it is important to include food fortification in national agendas in low and middle income countries? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. So basically, food fortification has been operational for a long time now. You know, if you look at staples like salt and vegetable oils in the past, and also wheat flour. So we have been on a food fortification initiative for a long time. Now, what has happened is that increasingly with building evidence and what Luz also presented earlier as well, and more accommodation of experience and learnings from different country contexts as well. Eventually, that has led to more confidence among stakeholders, be it the private sector and the government, that this is an intervention which is doable at scale. And they understand the entire value chain, all the stakeholders as well. And then there has been substantial evidence in terms of its impact also at the population level as well. And that has led to basically increasing confidence in taking this initiative forward as well. And I think also, you know, food fortification as a strategy to address micronutrient deficiency, I think has been established over the years with the different experiences that we have gained, and particularly in low and middle income countries, this is a very viable solution that we can look at, particularly for addressing micronutrient deficiencies. And also there is a lot of interest in terms of the national governments wanting to put this at scale. And also there is increasing public financing of these programs in many countries in the Asia Pacific region as well. So all these consolidated efforts in different country contexts and the experiences that has been gained through the initiatives that have happened in the different countries, this has led to the confidence and the focus on fortification in these many years that we have gained the experience.
Well, thank you, Arvind. Thank you for this. WFP is one of the most active players in food fortification, and not only by distributing fortified food products, but also by providing technical assistance. And it is great to have such counterpart as WFP. So now let's turn to UNICEF, and I would like to pose the same question to you, Ronald. So UNICEF advocates for the inclusion of food fortification as key strategy to address malnutrition and improve child health. I know that UNICEF work with governments, with policymakers, with other stakeholders to raise awareness about the importance of fortification and integrate it into national nutrition policies and programs. So why it is important to include food fortification in national agendas, not only of low and middle countries, but in general?
Indeed. No, thank you for that question. And I think several speakers have already emphasized that large-scale food fortification is such a promising tool because it is one of the best investments we have, not only for health, but also for national development. On the UNICEF side, we've promoted the use of large-scale food fortification because it is so effective at addressing these micronutrient deficiencies that we've already heard about. We also think it's such an important tool because it is quite inexpensive when it is implemented at scale. We've heard some statistics that it costs on average between 1,000 and 5,000 Vietnamese dongs per person per year to address these deficiencies. What a great benefit cost ratio. We also know that it's become a lot more timely recently. We're facing rises in food, prices of food. Many populations are still trying to claw their way back from the COVID pandemic and the economic impacts of that pandemic, and are therefore not able to afford a healthy diet. And therefore, food fortification, making sure that staple foods that everybody consumes contains these micronutrients at higher levels, is an important safety net for our populations. It's also a very good intervention because it does not require wide-scale education of populations and changes in dietary habits. It is also very much guided by rules and regulations and commitment by member states. We've heard from the WHO colleague about how WHO member states have made a clear commitment for food fortification in a meeting in Geneva not too long ago. As Arvin mentioned also, you mentioned increasing confidence. I mean, we know that there are more than 120 programs worldwide that implement mandatory salt iodization. More than 90 countries mandate fortification of wheat flour. We've also seen that it's entirely feasible for food processors to employ food fortification. Formal food processors are in a position to integrate food fortification principles in their production processes. This is a lesson we've learned from many, many countries. But one other point I wanted to make, and it was mentioned in the introduction already, that large-scale food fortification is not just for poor countries, for low-income countries. This is an approach that remains relevant even in high-income settings. Take Switzerland as one example. Switzerland would be severely iodine deficient if iodine wasn't added to salt there. Historically, 1/3 of men could not join the army in Switzerland because they had goiters that were so big that made them not eligible for army service. So Switzerland has addressed this problem by making sure that enough iodine is added to salt. Let's take the United States as one example. Only in the 1990s, the United States and Canada recognized that certain nutrients, iron, folic acid, need to be added to wheat flours to address one big public health problem, which is the occurrence of neural tube defects. So these countries, these high-income countries, only recently have decided that to make food fortification mandatory. We also know that many other aspiring economies, let's take India, for example, have taken such huge commitment to make sure that, again, salt is adequately iodized and are now able to effectively controlling iodine deficiency in their populations. So really my hope is for this gathering today that we can draw on these lessons from around the world and find ways to apply them to the Vietnamese context. We've seen the slide from the WHO colleague that showed that Vietnam is one of the few countries worldwide that is iodine deficient. We also know that Vietnam has had mandatory food fortification laws in place since 2016, but these have not been effectively implemented. So it is my hope that this meeting today will create the right commitment and the right solutions to make sure that, at the very least, food fortification approaches that are already mandated in Vietnam are effectively implemented. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Roland. I made quite a lot of notes from your findings that I like very much. Your thought about importance of education of people and about importance of awareness about healthy diets. And thank you very much for sharing examples from developed economies, because really food fortification is a global agenda. And you mentioned India. We have Deepika from India, from World Bank, who could provide us more insight about food fortification programs in India. So Deepika, let me turn to you now. The World Bank supports and promotes food fortification as part of its efforts to address malnutrition and improve public health worldwide. It provides financial support to countries for implementing food fortification programs, including financial support, including funding infrastructure, including capacity building activities. Based on your experience, what are the prerequisites for successful implementation of food fortification initiative on global, on national level, on regional level, and what incentives exist for different stakeholders, including public sector, including business and consumers? Over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much. And a very good morning to everybody. And thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. As you mentioned that I'll today probably share an answer to your question based on our work in India with the food regulatory body, which is called the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. And we heard this morning also that food fortification and food safety are closely linked. So what we heard this morning is about why do we need fortification and what has been done in this area in different countries. Probably what I can shed light today is how it was done in India and what made that difference. So one not a prerequisite, but I'll say a learning that emerged from this entire conversation about food fortification is that it's important to narrate the story. It's important to talk about food fortification from the context that it's an effective complementary strategy to combat or to tackle the issue of micronutrient deficiencies. Often we all work in this area, in this field, we often place that as an only strategy or a silver bullet to do that. Our biggest learning is to always talk about this as an effective complementary strategy that has worked elsewhere, that has the potential to bring down the micronutrient deficiency levels. Now, coming from the India example, what were the prerequisites? I think the biggest one that comes, and that could be probably a lesson or a learning for the global and the regional as well, is that we need the topmost leadership and the topmost will and commitment to work on this agenda. That was something that was very clear in the case of India when the food regulatory body was given the mandate to scale up and to talk about this large scale or to scale the food fortification across the country. That was the first biggest thing. Now, the second step to that, I would say that what if a nodal is there? Probably what we see elsewhere also is that there are many agencies, many bodies, public bodies and others who work in this area, and they are nodal. But what did this body did differently that in a span of 8 to 10 years, this entire story of fortification went from pilots to the large scale. And we kind of summarized their interventions in 3 E's, which probably can be talked as the triple E approach that could be looked at the global, regional, and the national levels, of course, adapting that to their context and the country-specific challenges. So the first E is about exciting. Excite. What's that excitement? So the biggest excitement is that this entire agenda of fortification lying with the food regulatory body. This regulatory body in turn took this fortification not as a separate intervention to tackle malnutrition, but embedded that into a larger national program. What was that national program? It was around the healthy diets. It's called the Eat Right India. So on one hand, you're talking about the undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, and the same program is also talking about the healthy diets from the concept of overweight and obesity. So fortification was not placed as a separate intervention with additional inputs to be done, but rather embedded in this larger healthy diets national program. Third excitement that comes in is that building in all the stakeholders together. Now, from the excitement comes to the second E, which was about engaging. Engage. Now, you have created excitement about the program. Let's start engaging now. So they started with landscape analysis. And that's where, all the development partners, bank and others help them identify that who are actually our stakeholders with whom we have to engage and talk to. So for this engagement, they set up a separate department, not a department, but a unit within the Food Regulatory Authority that brought together these different stakeholders. Now, in the context of India, there are different ministries and departments that work in this. Nutrition is multi-sectoral, and so is the case everywhere. It's not one single department that works in. So there is agriculture, education, social welfare, health, water, rural development. All these different departments have to come together, integrate their strategies. But problem lies, how do we collaborate? So this engagement came through a platform, a resource center that brought not only these public sector entities together, but also the industry associations to understand what are their challenges, what would take them to take this level to a next stage. Academicians, researchers, universities. Why were they engaged with? To have the country-specific case. So each country has their own problems, issues, and challenges. So building the case for that particular country, that why is it necessary to fortify in India? What are the staples that could work? And what is the scientific evidence that we have from the country itself to kind of work for that country-specific issues and challenges? So that was the engagement part. Third and last E that probably came was about enabling. So enabling these stakeholders to work towards them, towards the target or towards the goal. So this enablement area actually looked at who are the different stakeholders, what is their role, and how they can participate and contribute. Now here in this enable, the two big pointers or the two big steps that the regulator took was about, number one, fitting or setting the regulatory system in place. So till 2017, India had no standards for fortified foods. So they were set up in 2017 and then notified within a year in 2018. So that provided a level playing field to everybody, that the standards are there towards which everybody has to work. Regulatory system comes together with the food safety and the quality aspects. The second biggest challenge was then to set up and to fix the testing infrastructure, labs to do that. That required not only the physical infrastructure of the labs, but also training, mentoring, capacity building for doing the particular micronutrient test for the commodity specific. So there are 5 commodities that we are talking about in India for fortification. Mandatory is only salt with iodine. For other 4 commodities, this is all voluntary fortification. So second biggest enabler was setting the testing environment. Next enabler, I would say, is about social and behavior change communication. I think that plays a biggest role in this entire story of the food fortification. And this behavior change is not only at the demand side, but when we are starting or beginning the efforts or interventions in the fortification, it's actually on the supply side as well. So engaging with the medium and small scale enterprises, for them, anything if added to the naturally available food sometimes is called as adulteration. So how do you deal with, the suppliers telling them that this is not adulteration, this is within the standards? So capacity building efforts on the supply side, also on the demand side. So how do we convince the consumers? And still it's a big battle, that how do we build that demand for the fortified foods? So the regulator came up with with the plus F logo. So anything that's fortified is packed will come with the plus F logo so that people can easily identify. Now with this was linked to the stars, I would say. They even included the big industry, the Bollywood industry stars, to start talking about the fortification. And that also helped in changing those behaviors, or at least start that dining table conversations about fortified food. So in nutshell, I would say that these were the 3 E's that helped kind of build the environment for taking fortification from the pilot stage to the large scale fortification. So I don't know, Katie, if I answered to your question, or if I'll...
Thank you very much for this. And just to summarize maybe the key points from your answers, and this is a recommendation for policymakers and decision makers who are in the room to reach you, to learn more about this triple E approach, which is about excitement, engagement, and about enabling by creating an environment where food fortification implementation will be possible in all dimensions in the country. And also, I like your comment about the critical role or the importance of topmost leadership and commitment when scaling up food fortification. So thank you very much for this. And now let me ask Ashik the same question. Ashik represents GAIN. Ashik, thank you very much for joining us virtually. Thanks to technologies, we can have you in the room, even if you are quite far from us. So I suppose not only me, but all participants, all attendees here are interested in hearing your perspectives on the prerequisites for successful implementation of food fortification initiatives on different levels. Over to you, Ashik.
Yes, thank you, Kate. Good morning from Bangladesh. Actually, I'm very glad that you have included me in the panel. It's a very interesting panel. I'm sorry that I could not join in person because I have some another commitment here in the country. So thank you. Actually, the prerequisite, Deepika already mentioned actually triple E, she covered. So so my points already she covered. So I would like to share, as it is a fortification lesson learned, I wanted to share some lesson that we can share with the audience. That in Bangladesh we are doing 4 staples and condiments fortification. That is one is the salt. That is universal salt iodization, edible oil with vitamin A, and rice, both industrial and biofortification. And we have also doing a little bit wheat flour fortification. The first 2, salt and oil, it is a mandatory in the country, and but the flour and rice is voluntary. So that is already that Deepa mentioned that we need to excitement, engagement, enabling environment. So I think that enabling environment is very important because that normally the fortification, all the fortification initiative is run by the profit-oriented business organization. So if they are looking, their main interest is the profit. So at the same time, as they have their families, they also have the responsibility to the country. They do the fortification, that is to support the people. So that actually that enabling environment is very much important. That if in our country, all the premixes for the fortification, that fortificant is important, import based. So that the quality of the premix or fortificant, it is an important. So government should have that. Government has a strong regulatory or monitoring tools available to just to inspect or to verify that whether they are importing the quality premix for the fortification. This is the one important things. And that a lot of fortification initiative are new, so that there is no specific tools and guidelines. What would be the fortification level and what are the things, how to use it. So WHO is doing a lot of interesting and useful things, the different guideline, and that is manual to guide how to do the proper fortification. So in Bangladesh, we are doing edible oil with only vitamin A, but we found in our last survey, the 2019 and 20, that vitamin D deficiency is also very high. Around 70% population across the population are vitamin D deficient. So government decided to add vitamin D along with vitamin A, but we don't have that evidence and that experience. Then we send some people, like regulatory people, to India to visit some facilities, how they are performing. So this learning actually helped them to understand that how important is vitamin D for the human, and how it is performing in India and other countries. So that's actually that evidence for the any decision, government political decision, that evidence is very important. So that's another things. Another thing is the evaluation, the program evaluation. So we have started edible oil fortification back in 2013. So the refineries, they are asking that we are working in this area for last 10 years. What is the benefit that we want to see? So that actually science-based proper evaluation of the program, that how effective it is very important. That actually that encourage the private sector that they are doing something good for the people. So that's very important. And the monitoring, that is monitoring actually very important. This government regulatory agencies are doing the monitoring. So, but always we heard that government has limitation of the monitoring people. So this is actually sometimes a problem in the country, that we have to this is also the proper monitoring system should be in place. And for the development partners, I should say, they should work on the demand creation side. That is, people should demand the product. That is, they should know what is their deficiency, what's the importance of that micronutrient. So if there is a demand at the population level, the business people, that entrepreneurs, they definitely go for that. And business, that business, as I mentioned in the previously, that technical expertise is an issue. So technical skills and the proper manual guidance is very much needed for the business to start an effective program in the country. I think I should stop here. Thank you.
Ashik, thank you very much for your insights. What I heard that you echo the messages that were already mentioned by Deepika about importance of enabling environment, and also about coordination of development partners and business. In your case, Deepika, it was about engagement of all stakeholders who are involved in food fortification. So Ashik, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your insights. And let me ask another question. Arvind, this question is to you. Are there any differences in prerequisites that you just heard, and in prerequisites that followed by WFP when working on local and regional levels on implementation of food fortifications?
Sure. So as far as World Food Program is concerned, so our primary focus has been to look at social protection and school feeding programs wherever government is intervening. Try to look at opportunities for introducing and scaling up fortification initiatives through social protection and school feeding program. Trying to also look at what the regulatory environment is at the national level as well, and try to strengthen that wherever standards are not available, to basically try to look at developing those standards. Also trying to look at the overall landscape of the food systems in the country, how fragmented it is, whether it is import dependent, or how is the domestic food industry functioning in those respective countries. Also trying to look at what is the appetite at the national government level in terms of basically taking this initiative forward, and whether we need to do a pilot or move beyond pilot. Private sector engagement, also trying to look at what is the interest levels and how we can engage with the private sector. So these are some of the aspects which we have to focus on when it comes to fortification programs as well, without which the scalability of the intervention becomes a little bit tricky, because the gestation period for scale up then becomes longer if you don't take these aspects into consideration. And of course, costing is another element which keeps getting asked again and again as well. Because at the end, for World Food Program, the ultimate objective is that we have to move towards public financing of large-scale food fortification programs. That's the ultimate goal. Now, how do you work towards making sure that the governments have the requisite fiscal space, the cost is appropriate enough so that the government feels comfortable that this is an initiative that is doable, and then take it forward over there in a environment where there is a large footprint of social protection programs. In countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, where the government does not have a huge school feeding or social protection footprint, and it's purely market-based approaches, try to see how we can create assured demand for the private sector to be interested and invested in this initiative, be it workforce nutrition or any other aspects that could be available, emergency reserves. And we are trying to look at, wherever there is not a huge footprint of social protection programs, to see if we can look at these workforce nutrition issues, opportunities, and also emergency reserves, and try to give in that assured demand so that all the stakeholders become interested and invested in scaling up this intervention as well. So to answer your question, there are, regulatory environment, private sector engagement, looking at government willingness, and then also food safety and quality related aspects. These are some of the areas that you have to look into for these programs to be successful in the longer term as well.
Thank you, Arvind. And I heard regulatory requirement and regulatory framework. Linking to that, I would like to ask a question to Kumiko from OECD. And this question is about the role of regulatory framework when implementing food fortification on national level. Over to you, Kumiko.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, when it comes to regulation and policies, and actually the OECD has been doing a lot of work on the policy analysis and on also research on regulations and rules, and identifying challenges and good practices in the area of regulation. And also we share best practices. So with this OECD's expertise in the area of regulation, we have started actually a large-scale food fortification regulation project, and then we are particularly looking at the regulatory aspect of large-scale food fortification. And this work is funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we have been liaising with various stakeholders, including ISC, who is the organizer of this event. And like it has been mentioned, food fortification is a cost-effective strategy to address micronutrient deficiencies, but the food fortification has not reached its potential due to some challenges. And then we see one of the main challenges is a regulatory system. So the role of food fortification regulation is to have fortified food that meet safety and quality standards, and not under fortified, not over fortified, and increase the availability of appropriately fortified food. So that is a role of regulation on food fortification. And we see that the right regulation and its delivery of regulation are the key driver of successful implementation of food fortification programs. And when regulatory systems are functioning, fortified foods that meet the standards would be widely available to wide consumers, and then it accelerates the reduction of micronutrient deficiencies.
Okay, thank you, Kumiko. And linking to that, I know that recently OECD have started the development of a framework for assessment of efficiency of regulatory documents, regulatory, let's say acts, to understand how national food fortification systems work. Could you please provide us more details on this framework?
Sure. So yeah, under the large-scale food fortification regulation project, so far we have been focusing on the development of the measurement framework for large-scale food fortification regulation, and this is its measurement framework is actually the foundational document that intends to be relevant to all country contexts. And then we try to identify key elements of effective regulatory framework of large-scale food fortification. And we have been working on this project for nearly 1 year. So it's a bit too early to share kind of lesson learned, but still, yeah, this panel discussion's title is a lesson learned. But through some literature review and then information collection from several countries, including Vietnam, so far we have getting some insights regarding what are the key elements of regulatory framework for large-scale food fortification. So among some common key elements identified through several pilot countries, this is something relevant to Vietnamese context, so I would like to share with you. So first key element is policy. It is important that government identifies large-scale food fortification as an effective strategy to reduce micronutrient deficiencies. So to do this, countries need to capture micronutrient deficiency situation, and what are the commonly consumed food, and also need to select appropriate fortificant based on scientific evidence. That is one. And second key element across countries, which is common, is that it is important that government create a supportive regulatory environment for food fortification. So a specific example is the food fortification standard. So we need clear standard setting. This will facilitate industry compliance to the food fortification requirement, and also at the same time, clear standard setting will facilitate regulatory inspection by government agencies. And another element that I would like to share is that it is important that the inspection and enforcement at production side, import side, or trade or market side are adequately implemented. And to do this, we need appropriate tools such as inspection protocol, checklist, sampling procedure. These should be clearly described. And inspection is an important activity in order to verify if the fortified food meet the fortification requirements. So policy, standard, and regulation in place, and its delivery and implementation, so-called regulatory system as a whole, is critical to ensure effective and sustainable implementation of food fortification. Thank you.
Thank you, Komiko. And I'm happy that IFC is involved also in the working group that is working on finalization of this framework. And IFC Scan Guide was also used as one of the resources when the framework was under development. So while OECD is a new player in food fortification field, Ronald, UNICEF is an experienced player on food fortification. May I ask you to share more details about activities on food fortification in the region, and in particular in Vietnam? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, on the UNICEF side, our focus has very much been to see how to support mandatory food fortification throughout the region. I think an important starting point should be like which food products are centrally produced and are reaching large parts of the population. And then I feel governments should consider very seriously to make fortification of these products mandatory. So on our side, we've been a longstanding supporter of salt iodization programs in the region. I mean, we've seen some of the success that has been achieved, but we also know that This success does not need to remain if commitment to these programs fades. So a lot of our work is to make sure that these types of interventions remain on the agenda of policymakers, of governments, that we find ways to ensure that these successful programs continue, while then also, again, making sure that other types of vehicles are fortified.
Thank you, Ronald. Thank you. So I see that time is running and we need to conclude this session, but instead of closing remarks for our panelists, I would like to ask each of you about do's and don'ts when implementing food fortification. And let me start with Kumiko.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So do's, I would say, like, I would emphasize that make clear food fortification standard and establish clear responsibilities regarding inspections and enforcement, and also identify lead agency who leads this inspection and enforcement, and give sufficient power to the lead agency to coordinate several responsible agencies if they exist. So that is do. And don't, I can continue. Yeah, don't. So I would say that this is attitude aspect, but often regulatory framework and rules around food fortification may look like a bit too technical or complex and then difficult to understand. So I would say that the regulation should not be seen as a barrier or headache of food fortification implementation, and rather the regulation should be seen as a key driver for having right fortification level and therefore enable to improve micronutrient status. Then when public agency conduct inspections and enforce food fortification requirement, this should not create unnecessarily burden to fortified food producers. And when a good regulatory delivery is in place, it usually minimizes effort and cost for both industry side and then regulatory agencies. So don't is, regulation shouldn't be seen some difficult things. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumiko. And I like your comparison of regulation with a headache. Sometimes it's a big headache and hard headache. Ashik, we are back to you. So what are yours do's and don'ts when implementing food fortification on national level?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, as I've said that food fortification is driven by the business. So as business is regional things, so I think it is very much important to facilitate the fortification, the harmonization of fortification requirement and development of regional standards that the one country's fortified product can be exported to other countries, facilitate the trade. And also, I will recommend that it is very much important to do the voluntary, don't encourage the voluntary fortification, rather go for that is mandatory fortification, because it can be monitored with respect with a target. So also, I don't encourage to small scale fortification. So it is very difficult to monitor that the quality of the fortification. These are the few things I think I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashik. Roland, over to you. You do's and don'ts.
No, thank you. I mean, following up on the previous point, definitely, I think we need to look very seriously at what types of mandatory food fortification programs are needed for products that are centrally produced and widely consumed, because we know that this is the most effective approach to protect populations and also to create a level playing field for the industry. We'll only have this level playing field, of course, if this mandatory food fortification is also effectively implemented. And if that monitoring is not a standalone activity, but rather becomes part of a wider food control. So that, I think, is a very important point. We should then also see how other supportive measures could be in place. For instance, many countries have chosen to make the importation of micronutrient premixes tax-free, which is, I think, an excellent measure, or the required equipment to make that tax-free. This could be one way how the government facilitates the actions by the industry. I think we should also see then if, despite mandatory food fortification, certain parts of the population are still left out, and therefore we need some targeted fortification programs, and therefore look whether fortified foods should be implemented in social protection programs as one example. I think as the do's, I would want us to be really, really careful about our expectations related to voluntary food fortification, especially in this part of the world. I'm very doubtful that voluntary food fortification will allow us to reach the parts of the population that we will need to reach, or whether it may also just be abused at times as a marketing technique to increase sales of certain products, but without having a public health impact. Related to that, I think I would want us to be very, very careful about, in the context of mandatory food fortification, to encourage or to place a lot of emphasis on social marketing or creating consumer demand. In mandatory food fortification, these foods should be fortified, and therefore there is no great need to create demands for these foods. As mandatory food fortification is implemented, the population should be sensitized, the right advocacy needs to be done. But while it's running, creating consumer demand should not be a priority, especially also because we don't want to promote populations to increase the consumption of the vehicles that we're using, such as salt, such as cooking oil, even refined grains. These are not foods for which we want the consumption to increase. We really want to make sure that if those foods are being consumed, that they are also they are fortified. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. I can't agree but more with your list, and also would like to emphasize on the importance to pay more attention to voluntary fortification before promoting it, because there are elements that need to be considered, and it's not the answer. It's not the answer that will solve all problems. So I think that maybe a separate event will be organized in the future, voluntary versus mandatory food fortification, and we'll have more information from different countries to discuss. So Arend, over to you.
Yeah, for me, in terms of the do's, I would say that whenever we have the opportunity just to look at, be it social protection or otherwise, or market-based approaches, try to identify opportunities for assured demand. Without assured demand, it becomes extremely difficult to engage interest among the private sector players to become interested and invested in this whole concept of large-scale food fortification. That has been our experience. As was mentioned earlier as well, regulatory environment play a very important role in the success of large-scale food fortification programs. Private sector would want stable regulatory environments to operate in. And so as much as possible, if you can provide a stable and a robust regulatory environment, that would be very critical for the success of fortification programs. Food safety and quality has the potential to derail your program as well. If you don't keep an eye on food safety and quality while implementing large-scale food fortification programs, it seriously has the potential to derail your entire program. And we have seen experiences in countries like India, where one incident where there was a health issue in a school feeding program or through social assistance programs, some issues happened, there was health crisis, and it led to a complete stalling of the whole fortification effort that was built over decades, actually. So please keep focus on food safety and quality when you're doing large-scale food fortification programs. Never miss out on that. In terms of don'ts, be mindful that large-scale food fortification is not a silver bullet, and please don't communicate it that way. It's one among the basket of strategies to address micronutrient deficiencies. So we have to be very careful when we position large-scale food fortification. It's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet to address all issues related to addressing micronutrient deficiency. So be mindful of that. Don't ignore the private sector. without the private sector, the success of this program is not going to be possible. So please keep them invested and interested and make them stakeholders from the start itself. So don't ignore the private sector. Don't also ignore the food system's capacity in respective countries as well. And this debate becomes equally critical for both mandatory and voluntary environment as well, because if we are going to, which is our ultimate goal, is to have mandatory food fortification in different country contexts. But if the food system capacity is just not there or it is fragmented, we are in for a big surprise, because then, all the efforts in terms of regulation, engaging with the stakeholders to come up with a mandatory fortification, and in the implementation, if the food system doesn't have the capacity to basically absorb that mandatory environment, then we are looking for a very serious challenge over there as well. So I think this has to be kept in mind, and not ignoring it when we move towards large-scale fortification. So these were some of my do's and don'ts.
Yeah, thank you, Arvind. So this point about knowing country context and country capacity is extremely important. And I'm happy that in IFC we developed a tool that led to assess policy and regulatory frameworks as well as capacity building frameworks in the country on food fortification dimension. And we will present it today, as well as the findings of the assessment in Vietnam that was conducted based on the IFC scan guide, and that let us identify problems and challenges in food fortification area here in Vietnam. And Arvind, I also love your point on the importance of connecting food safety and food fortification, because if food is not safe, there is nothing to fortify. That's why when working on implementation of food fortification in any country, don't forget to focus on food safety, because this is the basis. And now over to you, Deepika.
Thanks, Katie. And benefit of coming and speaking at the end is that you kind of summarize what already has been said. But yes, of course, I agree with all the points that the previous speakers have made about the do's and don'ts. Two additional points. One, can we think, there is a big debate of voluntary versus mandatory fortification. We know that voluntary can take us up to this level. Mandatory, of course, provides a level playing field to everybody. Can we think of a strategy that's a hybrid, which is like voluntary mandatory fortification? Now, this is something, of course, coming again from one of the examples wherein the government of India started a pilot of mandatory fortification of the rice in the selected high burden districts of India where the anemia levels were high. So this was a mandatory approach, a mandatory program that kind of pulled all the players to do the fortification on the voluntary basis. Now, it assured the market for the private sector. It assured the safety net programs are giving out or are distributing the right kind of food, and the food is reaching to the right beneficiaries. So can we be a little innovative and think about what could be this hybrid approach that we can adopt till the time that ultimate goal of mandatory fortification is kind of reached? That's one. Second, again, a food for thought that comes to my mind is, can we think of some global markets for fortified foods? Now, there is production excess probably, but there is not a assured market. Can we kind of think of these, dropping these barriers so that it kind of opens up the market also for the private players, and the beneficiaries across the world have access to the right kind of the fortified foods? And the third point, which probably is also a learning and is a do, is to think about the SPGC strategy right from the beginning. Let it not come as part of your ongoing efforts, but something that's kind of developed and thought through right from the beginning when we are just initiating the fortification work. Last point is about the strategy. Now, often strategies are made which are like long-term strategies or something, but from my perspective at least, and from the experience, that for the food fortification, the strategies should not be kind of fixed. Let's there be an iterative approach, going back to that and looking at what worked, what didn't. So kind of revisit the strategy, repurpose it, refresh it, but let's not make it like a fixed strategy, and that's how we will move. Of course, for the short term it works, but it's important to see, go back and learn what we are, where we are, what were the challenges and how we can address that. So that iterative approach is important. And last don't that I have is not to position these fortified foods only for the public sector programs or the government programs, but to put them, place them as something that is required by everybody. And that's where it is important to tap the potential of the open market, because you do have the assured beneficiaries and the platforms, assured platforms to deliver these fortified products to certain set of populations. I'm not saying that those are the only ones that need. Of course, everybody, I think, especially for the anemia levels, if we see, everybody requires the iron fortified commodities that we are looking at. So let's not position them only for the government safety net programs, but something that is required by everybody to achieve that full potential that we heard this morning. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepika. To me, this list of do's and don'ts, they look like a list of recommendations for the government of Vietnam that might be considered when strengthening its food fortification system. And using food-related terminology, I think that it would be great to understand how to cook a hybrid system of mandatory and voluntary food fortification, and also to identify all ingredients for the recipe to be tasty and really working. So, dear guests, in conclusion, we have heard today a wealth of insights from our panelists. The information and experience they have shared will undoubtedly be invaluable for any country where the government is keen on promoting food fortification, and in particular for Vietnam. Furthermore, I would like to highlight the critical importance of cooperation and coordination of all stakeholders to enhance the effectiveness of food fortification programs in any country. And today's session is a statement or testament of such coordination. And I'm confident that this coordination spirit, collaborative spirit, will persist beyond the forum. And I look forward to reconvening soon to discuss the initial successful outcomes of our joint efforts. There is a quote that resonates with me by one Japanese famous writer, Satoru, who said, "Individually, we are one drop, and together we are ocean." So this sentiment is entirely pertinent to our forum's objectives to bolster the food fortification agenda in Vietnam and internationally. To our panelists, thank you a lot for your stimulating discussion. And to our audience, thank you for your engagement, and I hope you found the panel informative and enjoyable. Thank you very much.